lack of transparency can convince people to reconsider what they are eating and how the beef burger has landed into the plate. So this, as a consequence of this growing interest in animal welfare, we observe the prosperity of many associations. And these associations are struggling for animal rights that notably try to convince superstore to stop selling animal products whose management and production trigger poor conditions.
Considering breeding processes, farm animal welfare is concerned at every step, from its birth through its maturation until its death. Here, we will pay attention to the final act consisting in slaughtering the animal. In European Union slaughterhouses, 360 millions of pigs, sheep, goats and cattle and several billions of poultry are killed each year. Because of this crazy pace, caused by the important demand in meat, the control of killing methods entails strict regulation. Thus, European Union law established certain animal welfare standards for farm animals. Furthermore, they prohibit some aspects of industrial livestock production, such as veal crates, barren battery cages for laying hens, and sow gestation crates. All along this debate, we will focus on what is going on in other European countries regarding animal welfare in slaughterhouses. Together, we will try to answer several questions. Is the status of animals different in other countries? Are the directives going further than in France? Do other countries apply different methods that are unknown in France? Were there polemics about slaughterhouses like in France? This comparison can help us to know what can be done, what works and what doesn't, and finally, what could be improved.
So we are really happy to welcome like seven different speakers coming from six different speakers coming from all over Europe. First, in the first part, we will just let the audience get to know them, or maybe, I don't know if you first want to introduce them. All right. Thank you.
Welcome to everyone here to the first Animal Law Conference in Strasbourg in English. So I hope everybody will understand what will be said by the speakers. And we are very honored to welcome 6, maybe just 5. We are waiting for the Spanish one. As you know, Spanish habits are a little bit difficult to understand for French and for. But okay, we still hope that we will have Carlos among us. So we will start with Sabine Brels. Sabine Brels is a manager of the Global Animal Law Project, and she earned a PhD in law at the University of Laval in Quebec, and she will present animal law regarding slaughter all over the world. So I leave the Sabine, you can take the micro and present yourself if I have forgotten something.
Non, c'était parfait, Jean-Marc, merci beaucoup. Alors, du coup, je vais...
It's in English, hein?
Ah oui, mais j'aime pas faire ce qu'on me demande. Alors, juste quelques mots en français pour vous dire bonjour à tous. Tout le monde comprend l'anglais ici? Ouais. Sinon, j'espère que vous comprendrez mon anglais, ce qui sera un petit peu plus compliqué, mais bon, ce sera écrit hein, sur la diapo. D'ailleurs, j'aurais besoin de Cédric, pour mettre la diapo, s'il te plaît. So yeah, hello everybody, I'm Sabine Brels, and Jean-Marc did a great introduction of myself. And I want to thank the students for their introduction, which is in my sense very useful to set the stage. And so for my part, I will try to make a short overview because obviously I cannot do a complete overview here in 15 minutes. but just a short overview of slaughter law and why talking of animal welfare is just a global paradox. And I will show that this paradox is global and generalized at all levels of legislation, national, European, and even international. So it's a hard mission for me to begin today, because talking of slaughter for animal lawyers, and of course animal lovers, is a hard mission. Indeed, we would prefer not to talk about it at all, but it's an important mission because it's really critically necessary to talk about it and bring light to what is really happening there, make it visible, and also show what is also stating in the laws and why the laws are not protecting animals at all. And it's very important to know for everyone that animal welfare, even if laws talk of animal welfare in slaughterhouses are fairy tales. So it's a point that I will develop here in this presentation. First of all, how to introduce slaughter law? Well, it's like an old Western. You have the good intent, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that there is more laws supposed to protect animals. So it's a good sign that there is a will to better protect animals. But how are they really protected? Are they well protected or not? It's a general question, and in slaughterhouses in particular, for the act of slaughtering, stunning is a key, and I'm sure the next speakers will develop it more than me. But yes, pre-stunning, before slaughter, is like the thing which is supposed to spare animal from suffering during slaughter. But stunning in itself is painful, super painful, and there is also all what is surrounding the slaughter, so the psychological stress and a lot of pain and everything. So it's not my point to develop it here, but yeah, the question is really, there is more laws to protect animals, but are they really protected or not? Then the bad thing is that killing animals is globally legal for every kind of human activities, apart from companion animals. Generally, there's a protection against unnecessary killing, but still, I mean, vets are killing companion animals if not desired, or, you know, it's still like a convenient euthanasia that it's still possible. So animals don't have any right to life. And of course, when they're supposed to be in the plate, then there is no protection for them against killing. So it's a global thing to raise too, which is, in my sense, super important. But why killing so much animals? Is it necessary or not to take their life? We know now that we can do otherwise. So this question also has to be posed seriously at all levels, and politically it's very important for all citizens and consumers to make a difference in asking this question to yourself and to the society. Humane slaughter is just a low-lie. Low-lie, it sounds like a song, low-lie, but yeah, it's really something. Maybe it can help you to remember that it's a low-lie. It cannot work together. At least it can be a human thing, because it's typically human, but it can never be humane. Like, you cannot do a nice murder. It doesn't work together, like a nice rape or a nice genocide. No, it doesn't work. It's just a fact, it's the truth. So, yeah, again, it's a fairy tale to think that human slaughter is possible. Here is the front page of the Global Animal Law website that I've been co-created with Antoine Goetschel, who is a famous and brilliant Swiss lawyer. And now I am directing and the manager of this project, so I do invite you to note the address, globalanimallaw.org, because there's a lot of law sources, animal law sources and a database that I did out of my doctorate research. And here you have a few levels of legislations with all the legislation about animal welfare for each level. So today I will talk more of the national, European, international. With just an example for the national, so here you have the map. And so I refer you to the website to check what all the colors are meant for. But basically, yeah, there is the animal laws, civil code provisions, and constitutional principles protecting animals there. If you click on each country, you will have the list and then direct access to the official text in force. So I guess it's a useful tool for everyone making research in animal law. And just an example in red, it's where you have all. So they have a complete welfare legislation. They have a civil code provision changing the status of animals, saying it's not a thing, even if it's still subjected to the same regime, but still it's like a first baby step, but a step anyways. And also constitutional principles protecting animals. So yeah, it's Germany, Switzerland, Austria. And yeah, so for now, they're kind of the best protectors in Europe, even if it's not perfect, because it's perfect nowhere. To go back with slaughter, so for example, if you take the US example, where animal law is teaching universities, and there's a kind of awareness, I mean, but still they have as a title, so they had the Animal Welfare Act from '66, which was the first legislation actually titled Animal Welfare Act. But then they have the Humane Slaughter Act. And so they put together humane and slaughter. So it's from '58. It was one of the first one with this concept that we can kill humanely. And this concept has been reused after also in Europe, talking of welfare at the time of slaughter that we can find at European level. So the European Union was the first one on the right up to adopt a directive in '74 for pre-stunning animals before slaughter. And then the European Convention on the left in '79. And now in force in the European Union is the regulation from 2009, and I'm sure we will probably talk about it today more. But yeah, just to raise the fact that we talk of welfare during slaughter in these regulations. Then at international level, the World Organization for Animal Health, saying like up, it's like a screenshot from the website. Protecting animals, preserving our future. It's powerful. We want to believe in it. I mean, yeah, I want to believe in it. Woo! Wow, an international organization protecting animals and our future. Wow, it's amazing, you know. And then, as I did my PhD on global animal law, I was like, oh wow, wonderful, there is something to protect the animals. But then when you read the texts of the OIE standards, which are recommendations and nothing to do with laws, no binding force. Recommendations, so I thought, okay, so we can go super far, you know, like setting rights for the animals as the Universal Declaration of Animal Rights. But no, it's like the most horrible stuff you can read. I mean, it's like visiting a torture chamber. Honestly, I became vegetarian and now vegan after reading those OIE standards. So to say that I was so depressed to see how welfare was not protected internationally, and what was supposed to protect animal welfare in allowing the worst stuff. I mean, I was like, okay, so no, I need to make a change myself and not wait for, you know, like the UN or a super god to make the change for me, because no, it won't happen this way. So when you read at the text of the Terrestrial Animal Health Code, for example, the objective is, at the time of slaughter, which is one of the standards amongst the 10 standards adopted for transport, experiment, and so on. So they say it's for protecting the welfare of animals. So at in farming, factory farming, so at time of confinement, here in slaughter, at the time of killing, experiment, which is torture. They really believe that it's protecting animal welfare. But when you read the text again, the objective is to ensure the welfare of food animals, so like food, the welfare of food, until they are dead. Okay, so like, you imagine a sauna, a spa, and they have a massage, and a jacuzzi, and then a cocktail, and then, ooh, they pass out like in a dream. No! But still, they are having some unacceptable practices, which are 3 points. Just the first one here is immobilization by injury. So when animals are stunned and killed, they have to be immobilized, because of course they don't go themselves, right? They prefer to flee away. They have the instinct of survival. They want to, so they have to be immobilized. And by injury, and they say like horrible thing, it means, if it said it's unacceptable, it means that it still happened. It still happened that people are immobilizing animals in breaking legs, cutting tendons, or like putting a dag in the spinal cord. So this kind of things still happen. So it's like it said it's unacceptable because it's the worst horrible stuff. But all the rest, which is here on the table, for stunning methods and slaughter methods are deemed acceptable, associated with animal welfare issue. So here I do invite you, if you're interested, to just read. And you will make your opinion by yourself, because it's supposed to protect animal welfare. And honestly, when you read at the detail, it's really, yeah, as I said, like visiting a torture chamber and saying, it's okay, it's animal welfare. So there is the aquatic code also, adopted by the OIE. So same, we can say, oh cool, for once there is an organization caring about fish, because all the rest don't talk about fish. But we know they're also sentient beings. And so their killing can also be a sensitive subject. Not to play with words, but still. And yeah, so here, with the aquatic code, you also have stunning methods here that are allowed as methods of stunning or killing fish. Same for animal welfare. And just an example, spiking or coring, which is truly decerebrating the tuna, alive of course, like putting out the brain through the eyes with a spike, is considered as a allowed, acceptable method for the welfare of tuna. So just, yeah, to give you an example and then make your own opinion. So yeah, can we really talk of animal welfare again? No, because suffering is inherent to slaughter. So it is truly opposite to welfare. There is no compromise or conciliation, even if we want to have good consciousness. No, it's a fact, it's the truth, it's a hard, cruel truth, but we cannot marry welfare and slaughter. This is a proposal and my thought, as you saw by my position, but I think that we should move from a moral to a legal obligation to avoid animal suffering through every possible means. Today we have alternative products and methods that can truly avoid animal suffering. We don't need to make them suffer anymore. I mean, for the large parts. There is also now a global warning, also associated with global warming, about the current animal-based diet. And yeah, we cannot continue this way if we want to protect not only animals, but humans, I mean human health, humans also sharing of resources between everyone in the world, and of course for our planet with all the ecological disaster that factory farming is causing. And we know we have the solutions now. I mean, we're still finding new ones all the time, but we have a lot of solutions now to already, right now, without waiting, change the vicious to a virtuous circle. And in my sense, solutions also have to be adopted at global level. The most global organization now is the UN, So in my sense, as there is UN conventions for climate change, for biodiversity protection, and so on and so forth, this is factory farming and how to feed the world is already considered by the FAO under the UN, but we need to probably move further and do another step, as now all scientific studies are saying that we need to move on to change right now. And one of the proposals I'm making in my PhD thesis is that global law should sanction crimes against animality. So what are the crimes against animality? This is one of the proposals of our matrix that you can see on the Global Animal Law websites, where there's a lot of proposals at every level, from national to global level, from short-term to longer-term proposals, even that can be considered as utopia. So this one can be considered as utopian, but still it shows the way that we can go to. And yeah, so crimes against animality, I did the analogy with the crimes against humanity, because we can find the same with animals. So, for example, we find torture, we find species extinction or genocide, we find zoophilia, which is a rape that is forbidden as a crime against humanity, which is legal in some countries, zoophilia. Exploitation, slavery, and everything, all those crimes that are legal still in a majority or in a lot of countries today. Crimes against animality are still legal, and they can be considered illegal as crimes against humanity. Yeah. So they can be addressed either in the International Court of Justice or by a special court that we can create, why not, in the future for crimes against environment or crimes against animality, because they do exist, and I'm sure that with the consciousness rising, we will go this way. I'm sure. So we can already make proposal in this sense. So yeah, another idea is that this court could judge either public persons, like corporations, like huge firms, killing massively the animals, and humans and nature, because usually they are also interdependent. And also physical person or private persons, and all could be accountable for their crimes against animality, or against animal rights, if legal and fundamental rights for animals are to be proclaimed, in the future, like the right to live, the right to be free, and the right not to be mistreated or exploited. So, yeah, this is what it can look like. So it's a picture inspired from the GAL project and the GAL animals. So each one is a setting for a certain group, category of animals. So first, the dog is setting for companion animals. Pigly, the pig is setting for production animals. Then the other for wild animals. Then the mouse for experiment animals. And the horse for animal use in or abuse. Also in entertainment. So yeah, why to propose utopias? Because it's not because it's considered as utopia today that it's not possible in the future. Utopias are not always phantasm or irrealistic. If we want it, we can go this way. So as Oscar Wilde said, progress is also the realization of utopias. And yeah, how to make this world better? So same idea. Alan Kay said that the best way to predict the future is to invent it. So let's invent it today, if you want. That's what I invite you to do. So merci, and thank you very much. If you didn't see this short video made from Animals Australia, make it possible. Imagine a world without factory farming. There is a short or longer video. I do invite you to see it because it's really moving, and thank you very much again.
Thank you, Sabine, for your brilliant presentation, and everyone has noted your enthusiasm and your fighting spirit to change the world. So now we will discover what happens in Poland, and I'm very glad to welcome Thomas. I will avoid to pronounce your name because I'm not sure it will be something very successful, and Justina. And we will discover what happens in Poland, how animal slaughter is regulated and practiced in Poland, and more. We will also learn about ritual slaughter in Poland, which was banned a couple of years ago and which is now, the ban is now declared illegal. So thank you, Thomas and Justina. Thomas is professor at the Department of Legal Theory and Philosophy of Law at the University of Law and Administration of the University of Silesia in Katowice. Since 2016, congratulations, he is Vice Rector of the university responsible for international and domestic cooperation. He is member of the National Ethical Committee for Animal Experimentation and former Deputy Chairman of that committee. He is also many publications on legal philosophy, ethics, and animal rights. Justina is a student, PhD student at the University of Silesia, and she's preparing the dissertation on legal and ethical aspects of animal experimentation, and she is also a member of the local ethical committee for animal experimentation in Katowice. So welcome to both of you, and we'll listen to your presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Jean-Marc, for this very kind introduction, and thank all of you for coming and having us here. Our topic will be much more specific than the one presented by Sabine, but I think that it is quite important example, I would say, showing a lot of more general conclusions that I will try to point out at the end of our presentation. My colleague Justina will begin and tell you a couple of words about the strange recent history of the problem of ritual slaughter as a legal matter in Poland, and later on I will discuss how the public controversy over legality of ritual slaughter in Poland has ended.
Hello. To start with a few words about history of ritual slaughter in Polish law. According to the original version of Animal Protection Act of 1997, slaughter without stunning for religious purposes was legal. It was an exception to mandatory stunning. In 2002, Polish Parliament abolished this exception. Ritual slaughter becomes illegal. At the time, this change didn't generate public controversy or open resistance from religious minorities. It's very interesting. In 2004, the Minister of Agriculture reintroduced the same exception in his statutory instrument. Ritual slaughter became legal again, but it wasn't limited to local communities. It's interesting that this change didn't cause public controversy too. This regulation opened the way for massive export of kosher and halal meat by the Polish food industry. The volume of such export in 2013 could far exceed 100,000 tons. However, Animal Protection Act required all slaughtered animals to be stunned. Provisions of the statutory instrument issued by the Minister of Agriculture was contrary to this law. In November 2012, this regulation was challenged before the Constitutional Tribunal. Tribunal resolved the exception contradicted the Animal Protection Act. Lex superior prevails over lex inferior, so exception in the statutory instrument of minister was held invalid. In this way, the prohibition of ritual slaughter has been formally reinstated in Polish law. The entry into force of this ruling has been postponed until end of December 2012. Almost the same time, on January 1st, 2013, the new EU regulation comes into effect. According to these rules, this regulation, slaughter must be preceded by stunning, with the exception of killing animals according to the to specific religious rites. Member states had right to preserve higher standards upon formal notification. In this situation, Polish Minister of Agriculture drafted the bill aiming to reintroduce the exception for religious slaughter directly to the Animal Protection Act. This idea fell down after intensive campaign of animal rights organizations. Polish Parliament rejected this bill. Polish government delivered the relevant notification upon higher standards of animal protection in Poland on December 2012. All of this caused big chaos and big confusion. After the parliament refused to accept the bill proposed by minister, organizations representing Jewish religious communities living in Poland brought constitutional complaints against the rule prohibiting slaughter without stunning. This organization claimed that it violates the freedom of religious practice. According to the Article 53 of the Polish Constitution, freedom of conscience and religion shall be ensured to everyone. This freedom means possibility of manifest such religion, either individually or collectively, publicly or privately, by worshipping, praying, participating in ceremonies, and performing of rites or teaching. Noteworthy, according to Polish Constitution, freedom of religious practice may be limited when it's necessary for the defense of security, public order, health, morals, or the freedoms and rights of others.
Okay, so the problem that sparked enormous controversy in the Polish public opinion society, lawyers, the one that was to be resolved by the Constitutional Tribunal, was whether this freedom to practice religion may be limited due to the concern of animal welfare, of suffering created by stunning according to the religious ritual of the Jewish and Muslim minorities, which implied that, according to these methods, stunning is not allowed before the animal is killed. And the Constitutional Tribunal finally found that this animal welfare concerns that do not justify the limiting of the religious freedom. The reasoning of the court was, let's say, simple in the sense in which first of all, the tribunal found that the religious freedom of religious practices is a fundamental human right, that ritual slaughter in the sense of the accordance between the religious traditions of those communities and the method of slaughter applied to obtain meat is actually a kind of practice that falls within the scope of this fundamental human right of religious freedom. And the court found that out of all those possible grounds to limit religious freedoms that was mentioned by Justina on the previous slide, only morality can be considered, not health, not public order, not security, and so on. Only morality is a relevant, possibly relevant ground to be considered as a basis to limit and prohibit religious slaughter. But according to the Constitutional Tribunal, such a ban of non-stunning slaughter would not be proportionate in the sense that this intervention of the law inside into the religious freedom would be excessive. There were a lot of arguments that the constitutional judges presented in favor of this conclusion. Some of them were, let's say, at least at the first sight, plausible. So, examples of such plausible arguments is the court invoked the wider context, claiming that in the situation in which it is legally and socially acceptable to kill animals without prior stunning in many other situations, including hunting, for example. So the only situation in which the standards would be higher would actually make it impossible for these religious minorities to practice their religion. It would be unfair, according to the Constitutional Court, if we allowed killing animals, taking no care of their prior stunning in other non-religious contexts, and in this particular situation in which there is a sensitive religious freedom that comes into play. In this situation, we pretend that stunning is so much important for us that we cannot accept killing without it in any situation. Moreover, and it is legally quite interesting, the court argued that religious freedom must prevail over the welfare of animals because religious freedom is explicitly mentioned in the text of the Constitution, while animals are not. So we can infer only the concern for animal welfare on the basis of the general duty to protect environment and so on, but it is not explicitly mentioned anywhere in the constitutional text, and legally such explicit rights should be held more important than those which can be which can be only inferred. But there were also arguments in this constitutional court ruling which were clearly implausible, and I mentioned examples of such argument only to show that even that the question concerning animal welfare in many cases are completely misunderstood even by the highest judicial authorities. For example, the court said that there is lack of sufficient evidence to believe that ritual slaughter without prior stunning is in fact more painful and less humane than the standard way of slaughter applied in slaughterhouses. The opinion of overwhelming majority of scientists who are dealing with that, there is clearly evidence that leaves no doubt about the difference between killing with prior stunning and without it. It is also a common sense, I would say, clear on the basis of common sense reasoning that being killed while one is conscious is certainly something else than in a situation in which one is deprived of consciousness before. Even the court mentioned that it is doubtful if animal welfare is a matter of human morality at the moment. There was an argument that perhaps the further evolution of human morality will result with including animals into the scope of moral concerns, but at the moment it is too early to say that. It was ridiculed. This argument was ridiculed, that claiming that if we take a look into the history of ethics or philosophy or concern for animals from the early antiquity, there are many examples of leading ethicists who had no doubt that animals are relevant for let's say, from the moral perspective. And actually there was even a public poll made in Poland in course of this dispute, and about 65% of the Polish population agreed that slaughter without stunning should be banned due to the moral reasons. So claiming that it is not in fact the part of human morality was clearly contrary to the brute facts. But nonetheless, the ruling resulted in the striking down this provision of Animal Welfare Act in Poland, which said that in each case the animal slaughter has to be preceded by stunning. So actually, from the moment when this provision was struck down, the only regulation that concerns slaughter and stunning in Poland is directed this EU regulation on killing animals in time of slaughter, and this regulation clearly provides for an exception for religious rituals. And actually, the situation becomes even worse than it was before, because the tribunal clearly said that this exception is not dependent on the final destination of the meat. So this exception allows killing without stunning for the purposes of the local religious minorities, but also concerns the meat produced for export purposes, so the disproportionate part of these animals killed in Poland in this way are killed in order to export meat to other countries. The ruling was not unanimous. There are 15 judges in the Polish Constitutional Court, and 7 of them actually dissented from this measure, so the voting was 8-7, but in some cases those dissenting judges disagreed rather with the justification or the scope of this exception. There was not even one judge who would disagree with the point of the ruling, who would believe that exception for ritual slaughter should be banned at all. This ruling sparked a lot of outrage, and there are few rulings in the history of the Polish Constitutional Tribunal which would be criticized so much as this one. So it undermined very seriously the prestige of the Polish Constitutional Court. But to finish, I would like just to point out 2 wider, let's say, problems that I think are somehow visible on the basis of this work. The first is the problem that our constitution, as probably all or most constitutions in the world, and certainly all in Europe, are based on the basis of religious neutrality. So the state should be neutral to all denominations or religions and so on. So in the situation in which the court found that the religious rituals of Jews and Muslims are more important than the concern of animal welfare, it actually implies that on the basis of this principle of neutrality, each religious practices, whatever religion we would take into account, should also prevail over animal welfare, because otherwise we would have to somehow distinguish better and worse religions, better and worse religious practices. So in fact, it may mean that in each act of cruelty, if only the perpetrator would invoked his religious beliefs as the basis of what he has done to the animal. Actually, from this ruling of the Constitutional Tribunal, this ruling seems to mean that he should be just justified in doing that because it is a part of his religious beliefs, even if those religious beliefs are quite private, individual, and invented in order to justify what he has done. There has been no such cases since the ruling in Poland, but I think that sooner or later someone who will be accused of animal abuse, of a cruel act against animals, will be advised by his lawyers to invoke this religious freedom, his constitutional rights, to claim that because it was based on his beliefs how to treat animals, he cannot be accused and sentenced. And the second, I think, important conclusion is that something that is, very important step in the development of laws in Europe and elsewhere. That is the provision which says that animals are not things, but rather sentient creatures. We have this provision in Poland. It was introduced in Poland quite early, because in the 1997. So we have almost 20 years of existence of this provision. This is Article 1 of the Animal Welfare Act, which says that animals are not things, but sentient creatures, and the human being, owes them compassion and care. And this provision, this ruling shows that this provision gives completely nothing, because despite the fact that such a rule exists, in the content of the ritual slaughter, actually animals turn out to be regarded as an object of the ritual, religious ritual. So this rule, it is very, striking that this rule has not been even mentioned in the justification of this ruling by the tribunal, despite the fact that it seems that it is the basic, principle of animal welfare law in Poland, and quite, with long history, and not controversial. Nobody objects to this. But when it comes to the practical problems, it turns out that such a general principle just translates into nothing. So we need something more. We need something else than just. We call it in Poland dereification of animals. This provision saying that animals are not things, because res and plural re is in Latin thing, so dereification meaning making animals not things. But this sole dereification is practically, as you can see, ineffective at all, because in each real problems it may, again, the animals may again be treated as just objects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas and Justina, for your brilliant presentation, and I'm sure the public will have many questions to ask at the end of this morning session. So now we will have more information about how animal slaughter is practiced and regulated in Switzerland, which is considered by many people as the most advanced country in the world in respect of animal welfare. So we will see if it's true, and maybe it's a kind of paradise for animals in Switzerland. So we will listen to Dr. Thierry Berliger. He has a very long bio, because I will try to reduce it a little bit, because it will take half of your presentation time. So Dr. Berliger graduated from the University of Zurich and earned a PhD in 2000 and passed the bar exam in Zurich in 2004. He was the first international student at the University of Lewis and Clark in Portland, Oregon, and earned a master in animal law, which is the only master in animal law in the world. So, he also acted as a visiting scholar at the University of Portland. He has worked as a legal academic and attorney at law for the Stiftung für das Tier im Recht, Foundation for the Animal in the Law, which is Europe's largest NGO focused on the legal aspects of animal welfare. And he is now executive director of Tier im Recht. He holds several teaching positions at universities in Switzerland and in Barcelona and in Portland. He has written more than 120 articles on animal law. He has also published many books, and the very last one I will show you, which is the key of the Swiss animal welfare law, Animal Dignity, which I recommend to you. It's a very interesting book in English, not in German, so it's more accessible for most of the people. And he's also a freelance author and work for medias. So welcome, Thierry. We'll listen to your presentation, and hopefully we discover that Switzerland is truly a paradise for animals.
Bonjour à tous. Merci Jean-Marc. And this was my French introduction, so thank you for having me. I'm very glad and honored to be here. Thanks the organizer for the invitation. I'm pretty sure I cannot really fulfill these expectations about this paradise for the animals in Switzerland, because one thing is the legal situation, the legal structure. The other thing is reality, and we will see that, as you'll see also on this introductory slides, there is also the bad side of human-animal relationship in Switzerland. So what can you expect in the next about 60 minutes? No, this was only a joke. I will talk only 15 minutes. A short introduction about Swiss animal welfare law, then some facts and figures about meat consumption in Switzerland and the situation of slaughterhouses. Then we will talk about Swiss slaughter law in particular, and we will just have a closer look on the obligation of anesthesia in Switzerland. And then in the end we will take the topic of ritual or religious slaughter, which is, and I can say it already now, regulated in another way in Switzerland than in Poland and in many other European or worldwide countries. So first, some words about Swiss animal welfare law. As you know, Switzerland is a small country in the middle of Europe. It's kind of a landlocked island because Switzerland is not a member of the European Union. Also, it's really surrounded by members of the European Union, but this means that EU law does not apply, which has effects also in the field of animal welfare law. One of these good points which make Swiss animal welfare law attractive also for people abroad. Animal welfare is a constitutional principle in Switzerland for more than 40 years, and this means animal welfare as a topic is a national goal in Switzerland. It has the same level as a fundamental right, and so in conflict, for example, with the freedom of religion and conscience, this gives us another starting point in the whole discussion. We will come back to this. So for more than 40 years, and Switzerland was also the first country in Europe which had which included animal welfare in its constitution. Then in 1981, first National Animal Welfare Act came into effect, along with a detailed ordinance, and 8 years ago the Animal Welfare Act was completely revised, and today it's probably true that it represents one of the strictest animal welfare acts worldwide. Jean-Marc mentioned it, dignity of animals is protected in Switzerland. It's even one of the fundamental goals of the animal welfare legislation in Switzerland, and this is also actually unique worldwide. Other figures on meat consumption. Switzerland has, I'm not sure if this is really right, but there are figures and statistics and estimates which say Switzerland has the 4th lowest meat consumption in Europe. Nevertheless, the Swiss are big or huge meat eaters. Every year, about 68 or even more than 68 million animals are slaughtered in Switzerland. And this figure is excluding fish and marine animals. This means almost 6 million animals every month, 192,000 animals every day, 8,000 animals every hour, 133 animals every minute, or 2 animals every second are slaughtered in Swiss slaughterhouses. And the per capita slaughter rate per Swiss inhabitant, we are about 8.3 million Swiss. These are 8 animals every year. By animals, figures are the following. Far the largest amount of slaughter animals are poultry, with about 64 million every day, then 2.7 million pigs, 750,000 rabbits, about 400,000 cattle, 250,000 calves, 240,000 sheep, more than 100,000 game, deer for example, about 50,000 goats, and about 3,000 horses every year. Per capita consumption last year was about 50 kilograms. This is really lower than in other European countries and lower than in the US, for example. Nevertheless, consumption is much higher than about 60 years ago. And meat consumption in Switzerland peaked in the 80s. We had more than 70 kilograms per Swiss every year, and in the last decades it went a little down. So in recent years we are always between 50 and 54 kilograms. Average consumption of every Swiss in a lifetime are about 4 entire cattle, 31 pigs, and more than 1,000 poultry. And I think this one is impressive figure. 3 of 4 Swiss eat meat 3 to 4 times a week, and about 20% eat meat once or even more a day. Finally, figures on vegetarians. Vegetarianism and veganism is kind of trendy in Switzerland at the moment, as also in other countries or worldwide. Nonetheless, the rates of vegetarians and vegans are pretty low. Only 3% of the Swiss are vegetarians and only 1% is vegan. We hope that these figures will rise a little or not a little, will rise much in the future, but this is reality, so there is a lot to do in this regard. Some words about slaughterhouses in Switzerland. Contrary to the tendency we have worldwide of a big centralization of slaughterhouses, we don't have this in Switzerland. Switzerland is a small country and we have almost 1,000 licensed facilities. 670 slaughtered cattle, pigs, sheep, goats and horses, and about 260 are specialized for the slaughtering of poultry and rabbits. So many slaughterhouses, also many small slaughterhouses. There are also big ones, about 25 large ones, which slaughter more than 1,200 livestock units a year. And to understand what this means, one livestock unit corresponds to 1 cattle, 2 calves, 1 horse, 1 foal, 5 pigs, 10 sheep, 10 goats, 20 piglets or 20 lambs. So then you can count what this means per year. the slaughter frequencies aren't as fast as in the EU, for example in Germany, in Denmark, or in the US. Nevertheless, specialized Swiss slaughterhouses slaughter up to 300 pigs or 8,000 poultry per hour. This is quite a lot. So, let's have a look on the legal situation now. I give you an overview on the various decrees we have. Switzerland is a member of the European Convention on the Protection of Animals for Slaughter, as Sabine Bells mentioned before, for many years. Sorry, I think that's, it's not 74, it's 94, sorry. Switzerland ratified in 94.
79.
79.
Now 79.
Yeah, 79.
Convention.
Okay, but Switzerland became a member, I think, in 94. But it's not as important, because what we can say, this convention really puts only basic requirements, and Swiss law goes far beyond these requirements. In the Animal Welfare Act and in the Animal Welfare Ordinance, and then besides there is even an ordinance on animal welfare during slaughter. So many animal welfare regulations, and there are also other statutes, for example regarding technical requirements for the slaughterhouses and the facilities, the devices, hygiene, food security, and so on. But this is probably not as interesting for us now, so I will focus on the animal welfare provisions. And the key, as Sabine mentioned, the key in Swiss law, or the key in law regarding slaughter, is stunning, or the duty of anesthesia. I tried to give you a nice picture to symbolize this. We already heard that reality isn't as nice. It's cruel, it's bloody, and it brings death to the animals. Swiss law states that any vertebrate animal may only be killed and slaughtered, but not only slaughtered, but killed in general after anesthesia, after stunning. If this is not possible, all necessary measures must be taken to reduce any pain, suffering, and anxiety. And then, unfortunately, there are some exceptions. The killing of a vertebrate animal without stunning is permitted in hunting, in the context of pest controls. Then, if the used methods puts the animal immediately in a state of insensitiveness and unconsciousness, without any pain or suffering. Then there is an exception we don't like regarding frogs. If they are decapitated and in a refrigerated state, and the head is destroyed immediately, not nice. And the last exemption, and we'll come back to this, is for ritual or religious slaughter of poultry. Swiss law also determines the allowed, the permitted methods of stunning or of anesthesia. Don't be scared now, and you don't have to go through all of this. I just want to show you that Swiss law sets the allowed methods according to animal species, and in general the most allowed method is a captive bolt. This is the device. You probably have seen how this works in practice. Also, an ordinary bullet shot is allowed in most animals. Then electricity, for example, with pigs or with poultry. And the last one is gas mixture, which is used, for example, for the stunning of pigs. And then there are many further detailed provisions which in general should guarantee this so-called humane slaughter. And we already heard about it. I agree completely that this humane slaughter is kind of a terminological contradiction. It's just not possible to kill animals humanely. This is just a nice wording. And for example, the US Slaughter Act is really called Humane Slaughter Act. And by the way, it also determines that religious slaughter is one of the permitted methods, humane, which yeah, we don't agree all probably with this. So there are further regulations because regarding requirements and responsibilities for slaughterhouse personnel, then the handling of the slaughter animals, for example, the delivery to the slaughterhouse and the housing there, and the herding of them, and then there is regulation on the exsanguination of the animals. Let us go finally to this point of religious slaughter, which is regulated differently in Switzerland. Just to define it once again, religious slaughter means this is a ritualistic form of slaughter where the animals are killed with one single cut to the throat, and this leads to subsequent exsanguination. The practice is used in some religions. It's predominant in Jewish and Muslim cultures, and it's performed strictly or more or less strictly in accordance with religious laws and practice. From an animal welfare point of view, the method is very problematic because it's typically performed without prior stunning, and this can cause really tremendous suffering and pain for the animals involved. In Switzerland, religious slaughter is prohibited for more than 120 years. I think this is really notable. Switzerland was the first country in the world which banned religious slaughter, not in the last century, but even in the century before. But I don't want to not to tell you that the initial reasons and motives for this ban, which was included in the Constitution, even in the Constitution, they weren't really based on animal welfare reasoning motivated, but on anti-Semitic motives. Nevertheless, this provision is valid till now. In 1907, the Federal Supreme Court decided that poultry is excluded from the ban. And then in 1981, when the Animal Welfare Act came into force, the ban was removed from the Constitution and put into the Animal Welfare Act, means put on a statutory level, which is, in my understanding, also the right place to put it. but it was still valid with this exception for poultry, and then with the revision of the Animal Welfare Act some years ago, it was also transferred into the new Animal Welfare Act. There was a lot of controversy also about this, and also this balancing test in order to define if the freedom of religion and conscience is really touched or is violated. It was done, this balancing, and because animal welfare is a national goal in Switzerland, because it is a constitutional principle, there is another base. And even if the scholars, they don't agree all, if animal welfare can really justify this violation of the freedom of religion and consciousness, there is quite a consensus that this is okay, and so the situation remained the same as 120 years ago. Only few countries really ban religious slaughter in their laws, and I think from an animal welfare perspective this is really important to do that. Just by the way, it's also possible to religiously slaughter animals with stunning before. This is also done in Switzerland only for halal meat, so according to the Islamic ritus. And there is a but also in Switzerland, because there are huge Muslim communities in Switzerland, and also some Jews living in Switzerland, and because they are protected in their freedom of religion and conscience, the Swiss law gives them the right to consume halal or kosher meat. And this is a little tricky, because the Animal Welfare Act actually says Swiss government is allowed to restrict or to forbid the import, transit and export of animals or animal products for animal welfare reasons. And this would be really a good case for it. But then the same article says this doesn't apply to kosher and halal meat in order to ensure an adequate supply of such meat to the Jewish and Islamic communities. And consequence of this rule, there is every year a limited import of the meat, which comes mostly from France. Every year, or recently, the quotas are determined every year again, but recently there were 350 tons of halal beef, 295 tons of kosher beef, 175 tons of halal sheep, and 20 tons of kosher sheep imported into Switzerland for these respective communities. The import of halal and kosher poultry is not limited, because, as I said, religious slaughter of poultry is allowed in Switzerland. Nevertheless, it's actually not really done, because the production of halal poultry abroad is much cheaper. Most of halal poultry in Switzerland comes from France again. So after all these quite bloody facts, I thank you with, I think, a nice alternative. Please think mostly about these stuff, and I'm happy to answer to questions afterwards, probably. So maybe Carlos has arrived in the meantime, or otherwise you will talk about Spanish slaughter.
I'm checking my emails every 5 minutes, so a little depressed now, so we will have a couple of minutes of pause now. No? Or
No, first, Marie, no?
or we will listen to the presentation of Marie?
Yes,
Marie? Okay.
Les gens veulent une pause là de 5 minutes?
Are you tired, or are you ready to listen to a further presentation? Brilliant presentation of Mary Fox, who is the professor in law at the Queen Victoria University in Liverpool. Her research focuses on legal governance of human and animal bodies and legal theories and embodiments. She is currently working on projects which explore the policing of the human, non-human boundary and the role of technologies in mediating this relation, on the applicability of the ethics of care to laboratory animals, and on regulation of dangerous dogs. She is writing a monograph which examines the ethics and legality of genital cutting of children. Children?
Yeah.
Wow. That's supposed we speak about animals, so it's, okay, Mary.
Okay.
Michael is for you now.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to the organisers for the invitation to be here. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm very pleased by the invitation because it prompted me to think about this issue of animal slaughter. And I've been thinking about animal killing in a range of other contexts. And to be honest, I'd avoided slaughter in part because of what Jean-Marc just alluded to, the fact that I've also written on genital cutting of children. And that has got me into quite a lot of trouble because clearly, again, there can be arguments around how that's running counter to religious freedoms. And so they're two quite difficult topics to deal with. And actually, in researching for this paper, it became clear to me also that it is the case that many groups in the UK have run these kind of practices together, so looking at circumcision, looking at issues around ritual slaughter. So what I wanted to do, so I call my title The Politics of Animal Slaughter rather than the law, because there has been relatively little law in the UK. And what I want to do in the paper is just to think a little bit about the context in which slaughter of animals takes place. And so just in that regard, I was looking at a range of killings that were put together by the Animal Studies Group in 2006. And one of the things that they talked about was the real array of practices involving animals, that animals are so central in our lives, although often, as people like Carol Adams have talked about, particularly in a meat context, animals are an absent referent, she says. So, you know, we don't think about the animals that form part of our meat-eating practices. And the Animal Studies Group, this collective group in their introduction, said the killing of animals takes place on such a scale that's almost beyond comprehension. It's ubiquitous, it's omnipresent, it's a holocaust of immense proportions. And then what I thought was interesting about this quote was that it talks about a range of ways in which animals are killed. And obviously today we're thinking about them being slaughtered, but there are a whole range of other contexts, and that's what my work has been exploring largely to date. Looking, for instance, at the fact that we no longer, with our companion dogs in particular, tend to allow them to die. Most dogs tend to be euthanized. In the context of dangerous dogs, which I've looked at, so many dogs are put down, stray dogs, so many are put down. So there's this whole range of issues. And then interestingly at the end, the Animal Studies Group say that animals are perhaps even murdered. And I think it's quite interesting for us as lawyers to think about how we reserve the term murder for human beings rather than for animals. So we don't think about animals as being murdered. So that's a broader context in which I think it's really important to locate the debates, and particularly I think the debates in Britain which have become very focused on religious slaughter in particular. And this is a quote from, some of you may be familiar with this work, from Aaron Gross, who has done some really interesting work from a religious studies perspective on various controversies about slaughter in the United States. And in this particular case, he's talking about responses to an undercover investigation by PETA in the United States in Iowa, where they looked at a large kosher slaughterhouse. And it created lots and lots of pressure. In fact, what later emerged was that this particular slaughterhouse had very agrarious practices for workers as well as for animals, and ultimately it went bankrupt. But when the abuses against animals were first uncovered by PETA in 2004, Gross says the responses to it, although they were partly an antipathy to kosher slaughter, was really much, much broader than that, because he says, and again this fits into the broader context of killing, that when we think about the way that farming has become industrialized, back to Sabine's paper about factory farming, he says the big ethical question then is, who are we when we do this to them? And that's really the broader question that I wanted to think about in this paper. And then the other context, I guess, that I'm looking at is UK law, and just to say a little bit about UK law. Unlike most other European countries, we don't have a written constitution, so we have no constitutional protection for animals or indeed for humans. We do incorporate the European Convention on Human Rights, but there are so many people in the UK who are quite critical, in fact, of our Human Rights Act, which incorporates the convention. And of course, Brexit, soon we are no longer to be members of the European Union, although I suspect that if we had it to vote on over again, it would be a very different outcome now that the consequences are becoming apparent. So I suppose in relation to slaughter, and given that we've just looked at regulations in 2015 to incorporate European law perspectives, I think we're at quite an interesting point in relation to the debate about animal slaughter in the United Kingdom. So what I would like to do is really to run through some of the provisions then that deal with slaughter in the UK, and much actually, as Jerry was talking about in relation to Switzerland, the provisions in relation to slaughter really haven't been part of animal law at all. Again, just by way of backdrop, I wanted us to think a little bit about humane slaughter, the oxymoronic nature of that term, humane slaughter, as we've talked about, and to think a little bit about the fact that, at least it seems to me in the UK, as I'm going to come on to talk about, the focus has been very much on methods of slaughter. The debate has taken place around there, but really I suppose my paper would be a plea to broaden it beyond then and again. I think there are resonances with what Sabine was arguing for. Jonathan Burt, in his contribution to the Animal Studies Group volume on killing, talks about the problems with arguing for humane methods, which might actually reify the whole industrialized process of animal slaughter, and I think that's one important context we need to bear in mind. So then, briefly, what I want to do, having said that I think it's important to locate our discussions in this much broader context, is just to think a little bit about the history of attempts to deal with slaughter in the United Kingdom. And this is very much apart from any discussion of animal welfare. So the first regulation of slaughterhouses in the UK legal history, and it's an area where there has been a great deal really of legislative activity and lots of attempts to repeal legislation that has been in place. But in the UK, it's important to note there's never been a ban on ritual or religious slaughter. So regulations have always provided an exemption. The first regulation on slaughter in the UK was the Public Health Act of 1875, which provided for some oversight of slaughtering houses. And then the first specific attempt to think about animal slaughter in a welfare context was a report in 1904, so right at the beginning of the 20th century, when there was a committee appointed by the Admiralty to consider the humane slaughtering of animals. And interestingly, what it advocated for at that time and very strongly recommended was that all animals should be stunned prior to slaughter. So that was a really strong recommendation. Subsequently, a government committee said that that wouldn't be viable and that there would have to be some exemption for Jewish slaughter. And when eventually legislation was passed in 1933, and I think it's interesting, it's 1933, it's an era when there is a lot of legislative activity throughout Europe, and it is the same year that in Germany there was the Nazi law that banned ritual slaughter. In the same year in England was an act to provide for the humane and scientific slaughter of animals. And again, I think the role of science is interesting and perhaps something that we maybe haven't talked about, and I just want to add a few comments on that at the end. So the position taken was, first of all, that every animal should be instantaneously slaughtered or shall by stunning be rendered insensible to pain until death supervenes. So that was essentially what the act provided. But then it did have an exemption, and in now rather dated language it said, by the Jewish method for the food of Jews and by duly licensed for these purposes by the rabbinical commission which was set up to train shokat or the Jewish slaughterer, or by the Islamic method for the food of members of the Islamic faith. So this 1933 law, although there have been lots of amendments and lots of attempts to repeal the exemption, is essentially what still governs. So it's still the same position that remains in place in Britain today, that there's a very strong view that animals should be stunned, but then there's this exemption. And I think the use of exemptions is significant here because it does construct the practice as being somewhat ambiguous. So it's tolerated by law, but it's not kind of endorsed by law. And we see that this is in line with some very recent government proposals. Now you can see along the bottom there that there have been attempts to repeal this exemption provision at various points over the last year. So various bills have been submitted to Parliament, but these have all failed. So a couple in the 1950s and 1960s, and then more recently in the 1980s. Other legislation, so the 1933 Act has been reformed various times. There were two acts in 1958. There was the Slaughterhouses Act in 1974, part of which is still in force. And the Slaughter of Poultry Act 1967 had extended these provisions to cover poultry, and again there was an exemption for poultry. And just by way of figures, the figures are rather contested in the UK about both meat consumption and slaughterhouses, but the Food Standards Agency, which regulates slaughterhouses under this legislation, lists almost 350 licensed slaughterhouses in the United Kingdom, and they say that about 1 billion farm animals are slaughtered each year for food. So again, that wouldn't include fish. The government has an independent body which advises it called, formerly it was the Farm Animal Welfare Council, now the Farm Animal Welfare Committee, and it's produced two reports in 1985 and 2003, which have been very, very significant in, I think, generating concern in the farming community about killing without pre-stunning. So in evaluating the scientific evidence, both reports, they've had a number of reports, but the key ones have been 1985 and 2003, and both have recommended very strongly that ritual slaughter should be banned. And then these kind of reports over the 1980s through to the present day have coincided really with, so the legislation, the Slaughterhouses Act, the most recent one is 1974, so just around the time that the UK joined the European Union, just the year after. And then the regulations that have been enacted subsequently in 1995 and 2015 have been to give effect to the European Union legislation. So, and by and large, that hasn't really had a big impact in the UK in terms of affecting the practice. There has been a lot of debate about gold plating, which actually I'd studied European law and I'd never come across the term gold plating until I became involved in looking at these issues with the Farm Animal Welfare Council. And it is industries in the UK have been really, really concerned that the UK government is going above and beyond really what the European Union demands. There's been a lot of concern about this, but notwithstanding that kind of concern, in the most recent 2015 regulations, the government has said that the UK law must go a bit beyond what the minimum requirements of the European Union put in place, particularly as regards restraining of animals, so and particularly restraining of cattle prior to slaughter. So effectively it gives effect to the EU Council regulation of 2009, but it goes slightly beyond that. So the controversies then, so I want to finish with thinking about the controversies that are particularly in the UK at the moment, and then to say just a little bit about the broader debate and how I think it plays out in some quite problematic ways. And I know in the questions that Cedric helpfully circulated for us to consider, one of the issues that was discussed, or that we were asked to think about, really was the way that the debate gets driven by sometimes the release of information from videos. And the use of CCTV, which was not covered by the European Union legislation, is something that when the government was consulting on ways to implement EU legislation in the United Kingdom, one of the things that respondents constantly raised was the use of CCTV. And as Cedric pointed out, a number of undercover organisations, particularly Animal Aid, have filmed abuses. And if you look on YouTube, there's lots of them, and they're really, really disturbing. I mean, it's just like animal cruelty porn, I think. And that has led to bodies like Farm Animal Welfare Council saying that the government, even though it currently doesn't have the legal competence to do so, I mean, of course, it can just pass a statute, that it should introduce CCTV. There's been a lot of outcry from particularly smaller farmers who say, well, and slaughterhouses who say, well, this just adds to the expense that we have. And significantly, and I think this is something we might want to think about in our discussions, so we tend to look, as lawyers, we tend to look at law, but a lot of the use of CCTV in the UK at least is really driven by supermarkets and by non-governmental organisations and charities. So the RSPCA, and it would be interesting to talk about whether this happens in other jurisdictions, has a really important labelling scheme that we call Freedom Foods in the UK. And in order to have that certification, meat must be from slaughterhouses that do use CCTV. So in practice, the Food Standards Agency thinks, although again the figures are quite contested, about 50% of slaughterhouses do now have some form of CCTV, but whether it applies while they're holding the animals prior to killing is a bit more contested. And slaughterhouses are really, really reluctant to release this kind of information. So last year, the Farm Animal Welfare Committee recommended that the government should compel CCTV, and there was a great deal of support from the public in their responses to the consultations. The other thing that came up constantly in the consultations was concern amongst the public about exemptions for stunning from religious slaughter. And there's been a lot of, I should have had this on my slides actually, but for instance I was just looking for, this was the Sunday Times, so one of the leading clearly UK newspapers in 2012 this was, said half the lamb consumed in Britain is halal, should that concern you? This has been one of the controversies. So the third real controversy has been not only about the use of ritual slaughter without stunning and the allegations of cruelty that raises, but then the fact that food is not labelled. And there has been, I think, a really strong outcry. So and the government was consulting on the 2015 regulations, lots of the response was that people wanted to know the source of the meat that they were eating and wanted to know whether it was halal. And that in turn, I think, raises, in this particular article, the journalist estimated, again, fairly contested figures, that about 80% of meat that could be labelled halal in the UK actually did involve some form of stunning, but not the captive boat method. But it did involve some form of electrical stunning. So it seems to me that in this debate, there's a lot of information that is a bit uncertain and a bit contested. So I just wanted to finish by saying a few things about how I see the debate as being problematic. Because it has played out, I think, in the UK on this territory of there being a debate between religious methods of slaughter, and that has been counterposed to science, to ethics, and to animal welfare. And those discourses of ethics, science, and animal welfare tend to be seen as being progressive. And I think what happens is that positions religious or ritual slaughter as being something that is barbaric, that is primitive. And I think that can be problematic and unhelpful in the debate. And Jonathan Barrett, I think in his piece, was arguing along similar lines. And he goes on to point out, and clearly this has come up in the conversation today, that there is something about meat eating then which is an expression of dominion and domination, and how meat eating exemplifies an alienation. And then I think that raises some quite interesting questions for us as animal advocates, because if it is true, as Bert in one of the earlier quotes I showed you says, that in arguing for more humane forms of slaughter and in arguing for stunning, and of course stunning can go wrong and it can cause cruelty, and the Farm Animal Welfare Committee in the UK have pointed to bad practices in that regard. But that if we want to advocate against this whole structure, is that a more productive way to go? In one article in one of the US law reviews by Jonathan Rubinsky, he argues that in fact the debate has become unhelpfully polarised along the lines that Bert talks about, because he says what it does is to draw a divide between majority and minority religions. And you know, in the UK in particular, the debate's been played out now against a backdrop where there is, I think, a very strong element of Islamophobia, there's concern about terrorism, the construction of Muslims as being terrorists, and some government rhetoric has not been helpful in that regard. And similarly, our Labour Party at the moment, very ineffectual opposition at the moment, is having a lot of debates about anti-Semitism. And I think there are problems if this whole debate gets enmeshed in those, and we've seen the history of ritual slaughter provisions has been an anti-Semitic one. So I think if we want to move it onto this territory, what should we do? And Rubinsky suggests that to move it onto a territory where advocates against ritual slaughter are contesting meat eating as a whole would be more productive, because it would draw the barrier not between majority and minority religions, but between those who eat meat and those who don't. And yet, I wonder, and I'd be really interested for us to have a conversation about this, I wonder if in some ways that becomes unhelpful, because one of the things, if you look at the YouTube videos of the UK abuses, and you look at the comments below the line, and I know really you should never read comments below the line of newspaper articles or of videos, but a lot of people do just say things like, oh well, this looks awful, but you know, I still want to eat my burger. So if Rubinsky's right that we need to move on to the territory that many of us might advocate for, that we want to problematise meat eating as a whole system of domination, and we want to problematise factory farming, not just one method of slaughter, albeit one that might be perceived from an animal welfare perspective as more problematic, then how do we cope against that totalising system, you know, where most people are meat eaters? And I think some of the figures in the UK actually have been quite interesting in that regard, that it's estimated that about 4% of the population in the UK are now Muslim. So although the historical impetus was really around kosher slaughter, it is now halal slaughter. That's a really big issue there. So we have self-identified, I think only about 250,000 people in the 2011 census identified as Jewish, but it was 2.5 million as Muslims. And amongst the surveys of meat eating practices amongst Muslims showed that it was about 90% of Muslims eat meat, and 80% very, very regularly. And then if that meat is going into the food chain against the prohibition really that Muslim and Jewish slaughtering methods should be for Muslim and Jewish people, if it's becoming more pervasive than that, how do we deal with that form of meat production in the UK? So do we look at the broader issues about everyone being vegetarian or vegan, which might be what we would advocate for, but in the real world, how do we engage with these problematic practices when I think there is an absence of knowledge? And I suppose the final thing is that as a debate, I think gets played out more and more on scientific grounds. For me, this does replicate the way that debates about male circumcision of infants in the UK have played out, because bodies like the British Medical Association there have consistently said, well, the medical evidence is finely balanced, and who are we really to evaluate it? So one of the things I think we do need to try and avoid is debate being played out purely on scientific grounds, because some people will always contest the science. So I think I'll just stop there, and perhaps those are some issues we can pick up in later discussions.
Thank you very much, Mary, for your brilliant presentation, and Just forgotten to mention that all speakers of this morning session are members of the EAGLES, which is the Eurogroup for Animal Law Studies, which is a collaborative group of researchers and university teachers, as well as a foundation dedicated to animal law in Europe. So we promote animal law studies in the European universities, and I'm very honored to be the coordinator of EAGLES and one of the sponsors of the two-day conference. So let's pause, or we...
No,
start?
speaker?
Yeah. No news from Carlos, so we still expect his visit and hope for it, because we would have many questions to ask about the regulation and practice in Spain. So now we will listen to Birgitta Wahlberg, who is a researcher in public law in Finland. She is professor at the Åbo Academy University of in Åbo, which is the former name is Turku.
It's in Finnish. We have two languages.
The second largest city in Finland. So it's not often that we speak about Finland, so it's very interesting. And she is also a member of the steering committee of the Global Animal Law Project, managed by Sabine, which is no more among us. Ah, no, she is here. And she has written the first textbook about animal law in Finland. So, and now she is working as a member of the International Affairs Department at Animal Rights Sweden, which is an NGO dedicated to animal rights in Sweden. So let's listen to Birgitta.
Thank you. As a researcher, you need to have some kind of brain to work with, but even more important, you need to have bum muscles to sit on hours and hours, and at least mine was quite numb after this morning. So if you want to, please stand up and move your legs. Don't go out from the room, because I can give you a minute to stand up if you like to. And if not, then I just continue my presentation. The title is, first of all, can you all hear me? Okay. The title is Justification of Animal Slaughter, ? And my thinking behind this presentation is to take you further from the state where we are today. So I like to take you to a journey into the future and challenge your thinking and your own belief system of what can be possible. Before I continue, I would like to thank the organizers for this Congress, and it's warm-heartening to see that here is so much people. So really great work you have done. We have heard today about the numbers of animals killed in the countries which are presented today. It's difficult to take in the numbers and really feel the suffering we cause the animals. But when we start to see them as individuals, and we can see, hear, and smell, and maybe also taste their suffering, then it's a total different story. During my writings of my PhD, which I defended in 2011, I visited almost every slaughterhouse in Finland. I participated with the police officers in the inspections of animal transportations from the farm to the slaughterhouses. And I also worked a couple of weeks on different kind of farms. And before that, I was quite proud over the legislation we had in Finland, because it sounds pretty good. But when you stand beside the animal and you see the suffering, there is not much left of that protection. And that has then led me to work with animal issues from that day on. The first picture here about the turkey is taken on the slaughterhouse. There is huge problems with slaughtering breeding, transportation and slaughtering of turkeys around the globe. And then of course we can't take out from these problems only the slaughtering, because it's connected with how we breed, how we keep, how we unload, how we transport, how we offload, and how we kill them. So we can't only see on one thing, because we don't slaughter if we don't breed them. The other picture of the sow is from a farm I worked at 2 weeks, and I will never forget the eyes on those sows living in those cages most of the time of the year. So I wanted to say this just so you know where I'm coming from, so to say. So I have really exploited myself to the suffering and really tried to understand how can we change this. Of course I'm a vegan, and I try to every day challenge and check my own belief system and thinking. And yesterday on dinner you, Thomas, were successful to really open up it more about the legal status of animals. Okay, we start in Finland, the journey. Of course, we are a member state of the European Union, so Article 13 in the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, I'm sure all of you know that, where animals are recognized as sentient beings. That's of course also applying in Finland. And then of course the Council regulation on the protection of animals at the time of killing. And then of course there is also the regulation for the transportation, which is applicable in Finland. And Finnish Animal Welfare Act, the intention, the aim, the objective of the act is to, in best possible way, to protect animals from suffering and to promote welfare and good handling. So that is the intention, a typical welfare legislation, so to say. The aim is typical for welfare legislation. And also in the Act there is provisions concerning the slaughtering. Animals needs to be pre-stand and blah 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 blah, what is coming in every act about the standing, and we allowed religious slaughter too. Okay, and then in the Finnish Animal Welfare Decree, almost the same content is rephrased concerning slaughtering. And then we had a decision by the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, and there is more detailed provisions about how to stun and that kind, how the technical details, so to say. And still, as you here in France have seen the videos about what is happening in the slaughterhouse, we have the same situation in Finland, and I'm sure that when we go into the slaughterhouses wherever on the globe, we can see the same thing. I'm not going to open that link to the video from the slaughterhouses in Finland, but if somebody wants to watch them, there is the link. There is 3 different videos from the slaughterhouses during 2013 and 15, and what we can see there is that animals are beaten with plastic pipes, iron and plastic boxes. Especially sheep are treated by dragging them in legs and fur. Electrical shocks are given continuously, even on the face of the animals, even if they are already in motion, moving. And this was also something I could see in every cattle slaughterhouses. The electric shocks is every day and continuously. They walk with the electrical shocks in their hand. And it's forbidden by the law. And there is an authority controlling the actions in the slaughterhouse. So I don't see how we could more regulate anything concerning slaughtering that could help animals. We have the legislation, we have the authority to control it, and still we cause and kill and slaughter more animals than ever. So, as I said, we slaughter and kill more animals than ever before in our common history. We have the legislation on place, and still the meat consumption is going up all the time. Actually, I think that we are on the tipping point now, because vegan products are more and more coming into the market. So, and all of us who are vegan have sometimes eating horrible vegan food, but now more and more it starts to be tasting really good. So I think that will change the picture, and already I think now when I'm living in Sweden, in Stockholm, which is, I'm living in a vegan bubble right now. It's really great. There is just 1 block away from the office 2 vegan restaurants and a good store with the vegan products. So yeah, okay. So the world and our perceptions, they are changing. We have to believe that. As Jobs has said, the father of Apple, who really changed maybe not human life, but at least our behavior. He has said, only those who really believe in that they can change the world can actually do it. So believe in your own power, what you are doing in your everyday life. We also know that we are wasting more food than ever before in our common history. And I would say not only the amount of animals are more than ever, I would say that we are also causing more suffering to the animals than ever before. And we have severe human health problems and also environmental issues to handle and deal with. I have sometimes been thinking, what will the coming generations, how will they look at us? What will they be thinking? What have they done? Often when we read about, for example, of experimentations with animals, at least I often think, how could they? How could they do those things with animals? And there was a public looking at it, and no one was saying nothing. What are we doing? The same thing, but now it's maybe more concerning the animals used for food production. So use your voice, people. Okay, and now we go into the future. So based on this thinking of that welfare legislation and the legal status of the animals and the intention of the law, it doesn't function as protection for animals. So then in the frame of the Global Animal Law Project and the steering committee, where also Jean-Marc is with, we started to think into the future. And as you know, human rights, they were really developed through a declaration of human rights. So from that we started to think that how would we phrase a declaration of human rights and freedoms. And we came to this solution. The life of animals and their fundamental rights and freedoms are the birthright of all living beings. Fundamental animal rights and freedoms shall be recognized by law both on a constitutional level and in domestic or state legislation. The protection and promotion of animals' lives and their fundamental rights and freedom is the responsibility of every human being and government. So this is the declaration text. So what is behind it? First of all, I think we all can agree of that it is a form of fundamental injustice to take life. Whoever that life is belonging to is fundamentally wrong to kill. And it is a form of violence to kill or slaughter an animal or to destroy its habitat. And if we agree on that, then also it's totally clear that, as Sabine said this morning, it's not possible to combine humane and slaughter, humane and killing. Those doesn't fit in together if we truly understand what violence is and taking a life is. So how could it be justified? We know also that there is in real life situations where we have to kill animals. So in the proposal for the declaration, we justified it with two different points. First of all, if the state of an animal is such that keeping it alive would represent cruelty to it, or with the action a human or humans, or some other animal or animals, or their habitat are saved. Okay, now we are already in the balancing situation. How shall we deal with that? Then we continue to work with two principles as a base for the proposal of the declaration. The principle of necessity and principle of precaution. And the principle of necessity means that before animals can be used for human purposes, so before already the legislation, before the law, these criterion has to be fulfilled. And the first question is, the use is necessary for the survival of humans, non-humans, or the environment. If the answer is yes, then the following criteria has to be fulfilled. The use does not harm or restrict animals' natural, physiological, mental, and or behavioral needs in a negative sense for the animal, and the use does not harm the welfare or health of an animal. And the principle of precaution means that if the use, practice, or action involving an animal or animals, either actually or likely. For example, with the turkey cases we have in Finland, it's really interesting, but I can't tell you more about that right now, but it has been to the high administrative court for judgment and also in the criminal courts. And one argument to let the actions go on is that actually no one knows if they are suffering or not. Okay, what more proof do we need? For me at least, the one picture is enough, and there is almost 100 pictures of different suffering from the transportations. So therefore we took in the word actually or likely. Is to cause harm and or to restrict the animal's natural, physiological, mental or behavioral needs and interest in a negative sense. This use, practice or action should be prohibited and immediately stopped. So if it's already ongoing, it has to be stopped. And if we, under the principle of precaution, if we already know, then it should be prohibited. Then steps should be taken to ensure that the fundamental animal rights and freedoms established in law should be immediately restored to the animal or animals. Actually, after yesterday evening's discussion, I would like to add here not only established in law, but also established basic fundamental rights in the Constitution. And then more detailed rights and freedoms on the level of law. You can find the whole proposal at that link on the global animal law project website. So, with these words, I say thank you, and check and challenge your own thinking every day, and change your behavior after that understanding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoire. Now, Cedric, what do we do?
So let's take a break of 10 minutes, but no more. Okay? For everybody?
Okay, see you in 10 minutes. Thank you.